Well, hello and welcome to the Below the Rim. Well, this is going to go out on YouTube. This is going to go out on, we'll send it out on a podcast as well. I'm joined as always by my main man, Ads. Ads, how you doing?
Very well.
Also joined as always now, as well. We can say that now, as always, by my main man, Josh. How's it going, Josh?
I feel part of the Under the Podcast family now. You know, so it's a great addition.
So we're going to go for this this particular show. We're going to do now. We're going to look at kind of cultural aspects of British basketball. Obviously, we did the show the other week, which was looking more at what were we looking at? We were looking at kind of negative aspects of behind the scenes, creating media, that kind of thing. We kind of had a positive twin on it as well. I would say in terms of the BBL and what they do right. But this one, it sparked quite a lot, didn't it, on Twitter? So we're going to kind of feed off that to a certain degree and give some opinion on what we think culturally, you could say, would work in terms of British basketball, or more just what we think the situation of play is. Fair to say?
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing I want to open with is that everything we talked about has kind of happened. Do you know what I mean? Because it's made people in the basketball community kind of start to interact on Twitter, which is what we want. Because by doing that, we're then getting the opinions that we want from everywhere and discussing it. You know what I mean? And like we said in the last show, it's not for everyone to agree with everything. It's open for discussion. You know what I mean? So I was really happy to see the amount of people retweeting, putting comments, and some really great feedback coming through on it. So, it's just kind of what we want. So I think, doing this show quickly after is what needs to be done.
Josh, my man?
No, it's fair. I mean, at the end of the day, we were I'd say we made a point, we talked about restraints. And I think that word's very, very important because it's very easy for us to come up here and just blast things and give our opinion. And at the end of the day, unless you have a solution, you don't necessarily go anywhere. Now, did some of the things we say maybe touch some people in the nerves of some people? Yeah, definitely. But were they held as with any intent to harm anyone? No, it's just to say, here are the restraints. Here are some issues you might encounter. It's possible some things I might have said maybe rub people the wrong way, but at the end of the day, they were just there to sort of say, look, this is what's happened to me. Just be careful if you do want to try things like this, and here's some procedures you must do before you go about trying to do any sort of media for basketball on the side.
So, I mean, going back to that, looking at the Twitter feed particularly, we had obviously myself, Ads, Josh, we're all in there commenting. A guy called Ian Richards at how do you say that? Slow Bike Ian, I'm guessing that is, on Twitter. Listened and enjoyed it. Yeah. Ian Roberts. Yeah. He listened and enjoyed, said thanks. It was amusing how we start off criticising those who slap down new ideas before ourselves taking great pleasure in slapping down the idea of a football shirt in Giants branding. I thought that was great.
You got me in, you got me. Yeah, no, I mean, it made me laugh when you read it, because then I listened back to that bit again, because I was like, actually, did I do that? Maybe I did a little bit. And it's not that, I'm sort of going to change my opinion on what I said, because I'm not. I still kind of stick by it. But the old saying is there's no such thing as a bad idea. And, I've always been a fan of the opposite to that, because I think that there is such things as bad ideas. I'm not just talking about in basketball, I'm talking about in life in general. And that was a case of, for me, how can I put it, like an extreme case. And, I don't want to alienate people that are fans of both sports. The comment that I'm trying to make, and that I'm kind of getting towards, is that I don't want to see basketball ending up sort of being like we said, the poor little brother of football, sort of coattailing on it. And it's like, well, nothing's working, so let's go with something that works, football, and bring that into it.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, it was quite evident in the Twitter feed. Josh, your opinion on it. at that time, you've commented on it since, but was that links with football clubs are a thing of the past. Mr. Funky Town at Funky Town London wasn't sure that should be a thing of the past. I mean, what do you think about that? Is it a possibility? We know that Bristol Flyers have a link. The owner of the Bristol Flyers also owns, I think he pretty much owns every sports entity there is in Bristol: football, rugby, cricket. I'm not sure whether the cricket thing's, true in that case. But what do you think of that now as an entity?
Well, Foggy Town is a very good friend of mine. That's Simon Hosanna. He's one of the best in the business. Yeah. Greatest announcer. The other guy that got involved in that was another good friend of mine, Nick Whitfield. He also works in making international basketball content. And the opinion from Simon Hosanna was sort of the utopian basketball future that, well, football should get involved because after all this big fan base in football, how can we use that to sort of utilize the high participation rates in basketball? I said this yesterday on Twitter. I said, well, yeah, that's great, but at the end of the day, it's two different products. You've got to try and sell one product before you integrate the other one inside. Now, what I'm trying to say is that just because you might have a football team such as Arsenal, maybe Chelsea, that one day decide to start a basketball team, that doesn't necessarily mean that the fan base that they have will quickly gravitate to the idea of Chelsea being on the logo of a basketball team. And that's what Nick Whitfield was trying to say. One of the arguments I was also trying to say was that we've seen this so many times before. Most recently would have been Everton in 2009, where the football team had pumped a lot of money into a basketball program, but there wasn't much return on it. In other words, the basketball wasn't self-sustaining, so they decided 1-2 seasons later to say, we're done. Now, everyone's always saying, well, yeah, money could come from football teams. Yeah, it should, but the basketball program would need to make sure that it can run by itself efficiently without there being any debt that a football team would need to pay over and over again. Not every football team in the UK have owners like Man City where they can just chuck millions and millions and millions at a project and not worry too much about the return of it. People trying to say, I think as well, there's not a lot of problems with money in football. Well, Portsmouth Football Club, what was it back in 2009, 2010? Almost liquidated. Darlington Football Club, a couple of years ago in 2012, liquidated. Bury Football Club in Manchester. Yeah, they're gone as well. So football's not all this sort of $1 million business expertise, if you like. It's the teams that get to the Premier League that make a lot of money. And once they're there, they have their own costs as well. So the idea of football, I'm not saying it can never happen. Football could obviously make a basketball team somewhere in the UK, but it has to be heavily thought of. Number one, you have to build a foundation. So that means if you're a football team, you decide, we'll try this basketball idea, then they should be going to Sheffield Sharks, Leicester Riders, Newcastle Eagles, London Lions, and modeling how they do it. How do you build this foundation? How do you build this fan base? How do you get them coming in each week? Number two, they need to find a suitable venue. That was the biggest thing I spoke about. If you don't have a venue, or it's too far away from the football ground, and you're not playing games on the same day as the football team, it's going to be very hard for those fans to really commit to go and watching basketball as well.
I mean, it's a very fine line, isn't it? In all sports, really, it's a tier system, and all the teams that you mentioned there are teams that how would you put it, kind of highly regarded and decent lower level clubs that have all got a good history and have all done stuff in the past. But when they plummet, the fall from grace is monumental, right? I remember when it happened up here in Bury, and the poor fans were sort of drifting there in their thousands, volunteering to paint the stadium and help clean it and stuff like that. That's the passion that they had towards their team. Now, you mentioned it there, and this is the bit that I want to bring up, is that I think it would have to be a little bit more consistent, because if you look at it now, the first thing that happened when Sheikh Mansour bought Man City years back was they went from being this kind of almost seen as a bit of a joke team that went down as far as the second division, if you remember, to all of a sudden becoming the biggest, franchise. They became a brand overnight, a bit like Man United already had. Now, Sheikh Mansour basically owns Eastlands up in North Manchester, all the land up there, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where there's actually 3 stadiums on the site. Now, the word on the street is that he's passionate about having a basketball team. And what I always say is, well, where does that fit in? Because if Sheikh Mansour decides he wants a basketball team, one will appear, but in what league do they go in? Because it becomes that thing where all of a sudden the richest football club in the world can make the richest basketball team in the world if they wanted to. But then you've got kind of this super team, and if it goes into the BBL because there isn't another league there, that are then going to be playing the Manchester Giants down the road at the George Carnell, it sort of brings in that thing of, well, you know, if you've got the money, you can do what you want, but the other clubs just fall and fall and fall, and their popularity dwindles. So it's almost like that thing where if it's going to happen, I think it would have to happen for each BBL franchise, if that makes sense. So it was an even playing field. I wouldn't want it to happen that way, to be honest. In fact, if it came out on the evening news tomorrow that the Sheikhs decided, right, we're going to have a professional basketball team, we're pumping this amount of money, we're going to have this arena, I wouldn't be like, hurrah, brilliant. I'd be like, well, that kind of then, because of money, puts a mockery on the hard work that so many people in Manchester have put in the past 40 years. So, you know, you're looking at the Joe Forbes, the Jeff Jones, the guys that have been around since day one. It's like, so basically the years we've put into this game have now been bought out.
Do you think, I was going to come to this later on, but do you think now that there's an element of that creeping in because the Raiders now have billionaire owners? The new deal with this Miami 777, is it the company that's bought or invested into the London Lions? Do you think that's something that is now coming in? Because I see it as a positive in a sense that they're making it look, for all intents and purposes, like BBL clubs are a viable target for a big company to invest in, whether they're hunting for Europe or whether they're just looking for some kind of return. Because you're going to make, we're learning now that I can't find it in front of me, but we're learning now that the BBL clubs are losing 6 figures or more in terms of revenue just from what we've lost from this season. That's an awful lot of money coming in. And I know there's a lot going out, but that's an awful lot coming in. Yeah, go.
Going on to what Adam just said and going on to what you just said, the investment coming in those two teams. If Man City were to make an official announcement tomorrow, we're going to put a team in the British Basketball League, I would give it 2 seasons to last, and then it would be done. Because what those two teams that you just mentioned, the Raiders and the Lions, the difference is they're built brands, they're built foundations, and they've done that from the ground. They become businesses. Now, whether they've become self-sustainable business without debt, the fact is that they've been going for years and years and years. These people coming in obviously do see some potential in those brands and with the business of British basketball. How long they stay there, we don't know. I hope they stay there for a very long time. It's an exciting time for Plymouth Raiders, exciting time for London Lions. But my point with Man City, if we were to pick up the news tomorrow and Sheikh Mansour's on the front page, basketball's coming to Bellevue, wherever it is, near the Etihad, I would say it wouldn't last more than 2 years, because the immediate thought would be, well, we've got all this money, let's invest in the best British team, let's pay this player 10 grand a month, this player 5 grand a month, and then quickly it'd be like, we've got our books are getting thinner and thinner because we're paying so much in basketball and nothing's coming back on it. I'm not saying, again, that it should not be done. I'm saying that if Man City would one day want to decide, yes, we do want to start a basketball team, they need to start from the ground up like these other clubs have done. Number one, they'd have to start basketball schools, hiring coaches to go in and start coaching young kids. Start with some youth programs. Make a basketball program that invests in the community so the investment comes back, and then it becomes a cycle where it becomes self-sustainable. Then eventually, when they understand how the market works in the British Basketball League, slowly creep into it and start to slowly build from there. As soon as you just come into the British Basketball League, and we've seen this very recently, as soon as you see new investment just come in with new team paying all these hefty salaries, it quickly falls down very, very quickly. So you have to understand the market, how it works. And this is why I said in both my videos, if anybody does have this plan or vision, you must consult with Kevin Routledge. You must consult with the owner, Yuri, at Sheffield Sharks. You definitely must consult with Paul Walker and Vince McCall, because those are the people that have the most experience in this market.
I totally agree with that point. If this was the way that it goes now, and in a way it's kind of got, at the moment with this happening in Plymouth and with Bristol and whatnot, it has got that feel of, okay, are we about to have another sort of mini boom like the 90s? Because that's when it really went big, when the big, US investors started coming in. And we basically had another arena sport. It's like we said before, I think there was only 2 or 3 teams that weren't playing out of some sort of arena. But even so, the teams like, I think it was only Chester Jets that still played in a leisure centre. But they were by no means the worst team in the league. They were still a really competitive club that did what seasons, Cheshire and Chester always do and have these good runs and cause upsets and everything. And it's almost like they didn't really care that they didn't have the same facility as the Giants and the Leopards and Birmingham had. And they just went about their business. But yeah, the real important thing is that if this is what's going to happen, they must include the people in each city that have basically brought the sport to the level that it's actually at right now. So I bring it back to Manchester. If he did do that, you know, Bellevue's only a 2-minute drive away from the Etihad, the Eastland site. You know, would they come over and say to the coaches and the staff that are working out at Bellevue and the Amici, right, we want to do this and we want to take you with us? Or would they then put in their own team of people, some of which might not even have a basketball past, to try and do what they do? That's what would really concern me, because you'd have to absolutely include the people that are around now.
Well, it goes on that, like what you said, building that foundation. And again, the 2 people you want involved in the foundation, if Man City were to get involved, number one, you go to Jeff Jones, the guy who knows Manchester and basketball in and out. You get his family involved. He's got 3 kids who could definitely do a great job as well. You also got to Joe Forward. As soon as you make a project as big as something like that in Manchester, and you don't include key people in the community, you basically alienate the community. And that's the biggest thing you need. You need the community. You need that foundation. You need people to be attracted to the brand of what you're trying to do. And this is what I was trying to say. Just because you're Man City, just because you're Arsenal, just because you're Chelsea, if you decide to slap your logo on a basketball jersey, you cannot guarantee that you are going to sell tickets each week. You need to build that foundation. That's the biggest thing. Because basketball goes on to my point as well. Basketball fans and football fans, they're in 2 different markets. They really are. And maybe it's because we for very long have had – so what a lot of people try to say is, well, look at Real Madrid. They've got basketball fans. They've got football fans. Look at Barcelona. Look at Panathinaikos. Look at Olympia. Yeah, but they've been doing it for years. And they built that program over years. And most of those teams, the stadium's not too far from the football ground. Vice versa, you know? That's why it's important. If you do a project like that in Manchester, you need, as you said, Adams, find the people that have been there already, that have laid the foundations down, get them on board.
And I mean, the other thing with it is, as well, as it's like you mentioned the little video you did on Twitter, Josh, as well. It's like, so football's played at 3 o'clock on a Saturday, let's say, and then the basketball team has a game that evening just across the way. Now, there's no other way of putting this other than the way I'm going to, but the thing that would kind of concern me there is that is when 2 cultures of a sport then clash. Because, you know, let's face it, you go to a football match and, you know, it's loud, it's rowdy, there's a lot of bad language on and off the pitch. It's quite heavy going. You know, whenever Man United and Man City play, there's still, you know, fighting in the city centre and everything. If you then get an audience that just want to carry on partying for the day, post-football, the team's lost, how does that then fit in as a crowd into basketball, which has always been perceived over here as more of a kind of a family atmosphere? And that is by no means belittling football fans at all, because I'm not. But we can't escape the fact that going to the match on a Saturday, the crowd there is very, very different to the crowd that goes to watch the basketball team.
Do you think that's the difference?
Very good.
I was going to say, back in the days, sitting in Worthing Leisure Centre, a large number of people had watched Brighton half an hour before finish and legged it to Worthing to watch the basketball, and the crowds were so rowdy. It was very different to what it is now. We had a set number of chants like you would in a football crowd, but obviously the game's changed a bit since then. I'm not saying everybody came from Brighton's football ground, but the rowdier segment of fans sat in the crowd had been to the football beforehand, definitely. Almost. I mean,
there's that game that we talk about quite a lot on YouTube, the famous night at Crystal Palace. where the Greek team came over.
Paris,
and that game, you know, I've talked to people that were at the game, and you can read about it and you can see it. I mean, it's kind of a football, you know, a real sort of 80s, you know, ultras football day out, because the players are getting coins thrown at them. Is it Trevor Gordon that gets a coin thrown at his head?
To be fair, he does elbow drop someone first.
Well, yeah. I mean, Trevor Gordon's a bad example, you know what I mean?
But to get coin at a basketball game is insane.
Exactly. But the thing is, we know that is actually commonplace in Greece. Now, if you read John Amichi's book, the fans there, you know, I mean, there's passionate and there's
they say, don't they? You talk to anybody who's played in these places, and they say the floor moves. The floor is moving because the entire stand in unison are jumping up and down. There's flares going off. It's crazy. And obviously, the culture of that in this country is completely different.
You know how they tackled that social issue in Greece? Because this goes under what you're saying, Ads. In the summers of 2015 and summers of 2016, I was actually working in Athens at the American school for my teaching. And I was doing some volunteer work at one of the basketball clubs. I won't say which one. But then I was actually wearing the shirt and the shorts of that team. And I was caught in the middle of Athens while the rivals were celebrating their anniversary of a fan club anniversary. And I actually got stopped by the police, sat down in the middle of the metro in Monastiraki. They surrounded me, and hundreds of the rival fans were just outside cheering. So the police were just yelling at me afterwards, like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I don't speak Greek." So they told me the severity of it. And the police officer says, "You do realize that when the two teams play each other, there's no away fans allowed whatsoever." And I said, "Well, why is that?" Because then the government would have to get the military involved to stop the fans from trying to fight each other. It is, you're right. Because let's go back to case scenario. And this is another good point. The two cultures are very different. You think of and again, this is not a highlight of all football fans. The football culture, as it's known in pop culture, I guess, is there's a terrace culture. Now, there are family fans in football. And ideally, the best way that would work for the British Basketball League would be able to get those family fans to come and enjoy the sort of family environment that we have here in British basketball, which is a great atmosphere. But let's just say you've got two basketball teams. You've got Tottenham and Arsenal, and they play each other. There's a very, very big chance you're going to draw people to go to the basketball game. They're not necessarily going to be there because they like basketball, but it's going to be a chance to see rival fans, maybe to have a bit of a laugh, bit of banter, or possibly to display some hooligan culture. We don't know. But how we tackle that really is down to sort of law enforcement, security. But that itself becomes an extra cost for the league and the club to sort of say, look, we need you to divide these seats for the Tottenham side, these seats for the Arsenal side. But I guess a good adoption to go would be the way maybe the Greeks do it. Like if you've got two big football names that have started basketball teams, maybe say, well, there's been some trouble in the past. We can't have away fans at this one. And I guess maybe limit the amount of alcohol you serve. I don't know. There's definitely ways you can sort of work around the antisocial behaviour. But at the end of the day, it's a tough one. I mean, it is a real tough one to work on.
Abs, can you press pause for 2 seconds?
Yeah.
Just give me 2 seconds.
Another topic that came up, Mr. Nick Whitfield, again, we've mentioned him already, also about the cultural aspects in terms of the kind of the fashion. So the Jordan shoes, not just the Jordan shoes, but people wearing the jerseys. I think somebody else said that. Might have been Mr. Hosanna. Also the games, the 2K is like the second most popular game in the UK to FIFA, which is obviously the most popular game in the world and all that kind of stuff, but doesn't really translate in terms of the BBL and British basketball that we see at the moment. That's obviously something that might change as the generations come through, but how much impact, and this is, I mean, as a culture, the NBA, how much impact do you think that has on the British game? Because back in the day, if there was a slight whiff that a player came within 3 draft picks or whatever of being in the NBA, people would go to watch him play and would kind of listen to the hype, and there'd be an extra 20, 25 people maybe there, maybe more than that. I mean, we're talking 4,000 at a game at Brighton Centre. I think it was something like that, 4,000. when Dennis Rodman came, obviously the place was heaving. They opened extra bits at the back. Again, an NBA link. Dickie Simpkins came with one of the European teams when the Bears played in the ULEB. Again, there were crowds of people coming because Chicago Bulls player. And this was still in, this was just after the 90s and just after the Last Dance and all that. Another key player. Split Croatia came. Didn't have any NBA players. But, of course, the big link with Split Croatia is Tony Kukoc. Well, if Tony Kukoc has played there, that brought even more people to come and watch. How much do you think the kind of distance between the current set of players we've got now and the NBA as an entity, how much do you think that affects our game?
I mean, it's again, it's that thing that we touched on the other day. It's hard to formulate an opinion that isn't going to cause not controversy, but people to want to say something, because the difference in the standard of the game and the players between now and the 80s and 90s is streets apart, and it just is, because back then what you had was the guys that were coming over from the States to play here, they weren't what's the word here? They were coming out of high caliber D1 schools. There was players here from Georgetown, Indiana, North Carolina, Texas. You think back to some of these guys that played in the league back in the 80s and 90s. I mean, going back as far as the mid 80s, Alton Bird was an NBA draft choice. Yeah. Will Brown, who played for Man United basketball and is still very involved with the Magic now, he was an NBA draft choice. You move further on to the 90s. I've said this before, and this is something that someone once, I forget who it was, he said it. The guys that were coming over back in the 90s were guys that were getting drafted and going to NBA camps, but not getting one of the 280 jobs that there is in the NBA. And then they were coming to the UK because they could earn good money, play good basketball against players of the same kind of quality. Nowadays, what you're getting is D1 standard players coming over here. But obviously the game's changed over the world. It's just different to how it was back then. But you're not getting as often the high D1 players coming over, because they can go to South America, to Europe, and earn a lot more money than they're going to earn here. Is that fair enough? So you've gone from being one step away from the NBA to maybe 3 steps away from the NBA. But I mean, in defense of the modern day player, we've had players here that we know have had that shot. Mike McCall was from the NBA G League. Didn't you have a guy down in Plymouth that was out of the G League as well?
It was George Beeman from... we had Gary Taunton at the end, and he was clearly streets ahead. But George Beeman from Wolves was another one.
I mean, I was excited at the start of last season when I looked at when the Giants started announcing their roster, and John Mulmore's name came up, and I did what I do, and you go straight online to see a bit about him. I'm like, this guy's from Georgetown, And you're going, is it the Georgetown? And sure enough, it's like, wow. So you're thinking, this could be exciting for the league, because you've got a guy coming from one of the most iconic basketball programs in America, where to even get selected to a roster, whether you're in the starting rotation or not, you've got to be one hell of a ball player to make it to Georgetown University.
Parker was
another out for him. He only played a handful of games. Nobody really knows what the problem was, but from watching him, his style of game just didn't seem to translate into the BBL very well. So,
Parker Jackson Cartwright was another one, wasn't he? Who came over. He lit the league up. But he was a high-profile player that was getting people's attention.
Yep, well, he's a top player. And going on to add on what you've said, Ads, and sort of back to your question, perhaps to draw that sort of engagement. Yeah, it's tough if you don't. And this is no disrespect to the players we have, but there's a lot of respect for the players that we have right now in our British Basketball League. It's different when you've got players on the brink of making the NBA that come over and immediately sort of really engage, and you say, this is who we've got, tickets will be sold, Dennis Rodman. But with our current players, and I'm sure clubs already do this, but the best way to do about it is, if you've got players on your team such as Brandon Pill from London Lions, Lockhart, Justin Robinson, you want to send those guys once, twice a week into local schools in London, anywhere, especially in a city like London, just to do sessions or give motivational speaks to the kids or parents of those schools. And what you do is those players essentially act as heroes or sort of mentors to young children. And the next best thing is that you say is, well, would you like a chance to see us play basketball? And that's how you start to draw more fan engagement, of course. And I'm pretty sure every club does this, but by getting these players that we have now, and a lot of them who are very, very good players in their right mind as well, to get them to go and work in local communities, engage with younger children, that is how you sort of bring that family culture. Because kids will go home one day and say, oh, this really good professional basketball player came to school one day, told me that my dribbling skills are pretty good, told me what I need to do to improve. By the way, they're playing on Saturday. Can we go watch them play? That's how you start to build sort of more engagement with fans coming in. And I think as time goes on, those players will start to build bigger names themselves with more fan attraction, I guess.
I mean, the one thing that I really hope, and there's obviously been nothing said as yet, I really, really, really hope that Ovi stays in the BBL next season whenever it happens, because obviously no one could see what was coming for this year, nobody. But fate has dealt us this card, and we got to see Ovi playing for 3/4 of a season, whatever it was. And he was doing a lot of work to generate interest into the game. One thing that I had a conversation with somebody about branding and stuff like that. Ovi was a golden ticket for the BBL, I thought. And what I would have hoped to have, I don't know how far it would have got. If somebody like a Nike or an Adidas or even Kappa had to think about it and went, right, okay, this guy's hot property at the moment. He's drawing in new people to the arenas. You know, he just is. What can we do? Do we start to try out dipping our toe in the water of producing some kind of Air Jordan-ish type wear with Ovi Soko on it? Dare I say it? Does a UK company like ASOS that he's heavily associated with come out with an Ovi Soko shoe?
Yeah.
You know, whether they do that as a functional playing shoe or then do just a regular everyday street shoe like the Air Jordans become. Surely it would be worth a punt for a company to go, let's invest some time and market this guy who is able to back up the hype because he's such a great basketball player, and use that to elevate the sport. It's all about, has anybody got the balls to actually sort of go, let's take a punt on it, you know, a big company. If I had the money as Brand 161, nothing would give me more pleasure than to work with Ovi Soko on a shoe of some sort. And we all know that basketball shoes are expensive, but they don't necessarily have to be so expensive that they're just unaffordable. Do you guys remember the project that Stephon Marbury did?
Yes, yeah.
Do you remember it, Josh?
Yeah, $14 for the shoe, wasn't it? Because it was it was supposed to be a shoe designated for kids that couldn't afford high price. I mean, I thought it was a great idea, but I don't think it lasted long, though, did it?
That was the thing. It was one of those ideas that came up, and you're thinking, "Wow, what a bold statement for someone to sit back and actually criticize the machine that is brand Jordan and Nike, and prove the point that these shoes that everybody's spending $180 or £180 on actually only cost this much to make, and we can sell them at $15-20 and still make money on them."
Yeah.
We know that economics is what it is, and that the Air Jordan shoe that we all love and spend a lot of money on doesn't cost more than $5 to actually produce, and the markups used. So that's why I'm saying, why don't we, why doesn't the company think, let's work with this guy, get his input into it, much like Nike did with Jordan, and produce stuff that he wears that maybe just latches on. So the British kids go, you know what, we've got our own version now. And I'm not saying that anything can come in and take over the Jordan beast. It just won't. It's there for the rest of, as long as the game of basketball exists, Air Jordan will be the most recognisable brand there is. But how about trying it? Market a player, and if it works, we move on to the next player. Now, the only problem with it is is that we'd need Ovi to be in the BBL for another year, preferably for 2 years. The turnaround of players in this league is difficult, but there's nothing to say that guys like, let's look at a guy like Brandon Peel, who has been here a few years, that you don't, say, okay, well, you've made a home here. You obviously want to stick around. Let's do a Brandon Peel shirt or a jersey of some sort.
Mm. No, absolutely. That kind of leads me on, because bottom line of it, and a lot of it comes down strictly to finance. It's the cost. It'd be lovely for every single BBL team to have their own stadium. It's not viable for some teams to do that because of the cost. It'd be lovely if every single team could enter into Europe. But this is kind of my next question is, and it's not every team, but the top teams, particularly your Leicester Riders, your Newcastle Eagles, your London Lions, Worcester Wolves, kind of creeping up into that discussion now. If these teams regularly enter Europe, and with the money now that the Raiders have got and the money now that the Lions have potentially got as well, and they're just seeking European competition and success, does that, in a sense, save the BBL? Is that enough to push us over the line in terms of marketing players like Ovi Soko, marketing our league to a higher standard because players from the outside know they can come to this country and they have a chance to play in European competition? Is that kind of enough to save the league? Not that the league needs saving, but you know what I mean.
Absolutely. I mean, Leicester Riders were in the Basketball Champions League qualification 2 seasons ago. I wish they'd stayed in it for another year because it was a tough entry that year, because I don't think a British team had played in Europe since the Guildford Heat in 2007-8, when Dorsey played with them. And that's a long time for a British team not to be in continental competition. So it was always going to be a tough year. But by being in the Basketball Champions League, that will attract some players' interest to come to the UK and to play in the UK, because why? Well, each week they're going to be playing against some top European teams. Going on to what you said about the Plymouth Raiders, perhaps how long have you lived in Plymouth?
Five. I don't live quite in Plymouth, but about 5 years.
Okay, so I think it was back in 2009 or 10. I could be wrong on this, so Eager Beavers on Twitter, you can shout at me if you want. But I think there was talk about there being the prospect of putting the Raiders into Europe about a decade ago, I think in 2010. The problem with the Plymouth Raiders is they just couldn't sort themselves out from 2010 to 2016. I think the coach was, a guy called Jay Marriott, was a great player. I thought he was a decent coach. The problem was they couldn't get the right players in and out to sort of get the team to do well. They were always finishing the bottom half of the table. So for Plymouth, this new investment means you got to get the right coach. I think Paul James is the right coach for them. And they've got to try and get things going on the basketball court now in the BBL, so to really sort of push for a spot in Europe. It can be done, but it's going to be a work in progress. The teams, I think, best suited right now in terms of their sort of the program they've got and how well they're playing the British Basketball League. I think you're looking at Newcastle, you're looking at Leicester, possibly Sheffield, and of course, if you've got Justin Robinson, Brandon Pill, and you've got Ovi Soko on your team, London Lions are going to be a hot favourite to be playing in Europe. Yes, playing in Europe will be good for those teams because it will attract some interest from players all over Europe and America to play for these teams. Why? Because you've been playing all over Europe at that point.
Would it be enough to say that for other teams as well, that would have a knock-on effect?
Yes and no. I mean, it depends. I mean, just playing in Europe doesn't necessarily mean... I mean, London's a big market, and you can see all the time that there's talks about putting an NBA team here. There's talks about putting another European powerhouse. I mean, London is a big city. People do travel here, of course. And I guess you could put Birmingham, you could definitely put Manchester into that aspect as well. So possibly, if it's done consistently over and over and over, then what you might find is big businesses might realize there's potential here. But if it's done one season, then it might be tough, because then people might see, again, what we spoke about, the return on the investment might not be so popular. But for me, it has to be done consistently for that to happen.
I mean, here's an interesting... With Europe, obviously, perhaps you've just done the video about, the history of British basketball in Europe, which was amazing. And when I started looking back through some Manchester stuff for you, when the team was Manchester United for that 2 years, they were playing big-time Europe teams. They were playing the Real Madrid. And, the team that they had was so loaded with superstars at the time Alton Bird played. You've got guys like Will Brown that I mentioned, Jeff Jones, but there's great British players as well, the likes of Kevin Penny, Carl Miller. The list goes on of some of the greatest British players and greatest American players forming this super team by a super club and suddenly competing in Europe. So I think that it definitely opens the door to something, because what you might then get is a team that isn't necessarily playing in European competition at that point, but their intention's very much there. That attracts players to come and play for the team because they want to help that franchise get into Europe. One of the most tragic things that happened at the end of the Giants in the 90s was the fact that Tony Dorsey and Phil Handy have both told me this separately, that after they'd won that championship, everybody was wanting to come back the year after, because the next thing to try and conquer was Europe. So Dorsey, Holly, Phil Handy, Nick Nurse, the core of that team, Roy Heston, had all committed to play for Manchester again the next year and take on Europe. And then the plug got pulled, So it's like British basketball's kind of had this sort of love affair with European basketball, but never managed to fully get back involved with it since the 80s, I don't think.
Certainly the game that we've already mentioned it once, haven't we? The Aris Thessaloniki game that the Kingston Kings played at Crystal Palace and that's probably, Crystal Palace themselves as a team had a tremendous run in Europe, but the Kingston Kings run seems to have been the best in terms of, which is something else that crops up quite a lot. The top level. This is just to finish off now, guys. The top level British players that we've got, that we see playing for GB, the Luke Nelsons, the Miles Hessens, they all play in European competition in other countries. We don't have them playing in Britain, and that seems to be an ongoing complaint from people watching. Is we don't have the best British players here. We need to bring them back.
You know what?
Of all, well, go on, yeah, go.
It breaks my heart every time I go to a GB game, men's or women's, because you see the talent that we actually have that we don't get to see in the BBL. I'm not going to get back into the thing about it's difficult for GB to build a good following when a lot of the fans don't know who these players are, because a lot of them aren't in the BBL. But if you look at guys like, luckily we've had Ovi in the BBL, which has been great. Ben Mockford was amazing in the last game in Newcastle, playing in the BBL. Miles Hesson, for me, has got superstar written all over him. I mean, he's that good. He's that exciting. He's highlight film from start to finish. But there's no way we're going to see Miles Hesson playing back in the UK anytime soon, because his financial value just can't be recognised in the BBL right now. And then if people say, well, we got Ovi Soko, what we've got to remember is that Ovi Soko doesn't need to rely on his salary from the London Lions to make a living, because he'll have taken a huge drop in money from playing in Europe to playing back in London. But because he's become so commercially successful, he's making a great living doing what he does as a celebrity, what he does with ASOS. So he's sorted. The fact that he wanted to come back and play in the UK was huge. But to get the Miles Hessens, the Luke Nelsons, these guys back in the UK playing, we've got to raise the bar so that the money's there for them to come back and play. And then we've got this potential to do what I was saying there about marketing a player and making them the face of the league like Ovi's becoming, and having a couple of superstars.
That's exactly right. You're right. Their market value it's too high for the current state of what we have, because you're right. They can make the money that they are respectively making. I don't know any figures. I don't ask any people what they make. I'd imagine it's far beyond what they could make if they're back here at home. And it goes to the question, if you want to build a British basketball team currently in the current stage of the market based on British players, you just have to go back to history and look at in 2013-14, there was the Birmingham Knights. That was a pretty much, apart from the likes of Brett Benson, it was a pretty much British team. They hadn't won any games. Essex Pirates back in 2010 or 11, that was a full British team as well. That was 0 wins. So it's not that I'm not saying there's no British players that can play in the BBL. There are definitely some great. Connor Washington. You've got Jamal Anderson from Leicester. But you need a balance. You need a balance of some British players, some players you can get from the EU, and then obviously there's an abundance of Americans that will come over that are still fantastic players. Hawthorne, for example, for Surrey Scorchers, for me, one of the most exciting players in the British Basketball League. You can always find players that will be able to play in this league. But to build a team based on strong British players, it's quite a far away time from now that will be seen. Hopefully one day it will be seen, but with the current state of the market, it's pretty tough.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember as well, Manchester did that when they came back. The team that Jeff was coaching was all English guys. Yep. You know, you had I think that, in fact, they were probably the most successful team that Giants have had since the comeback. And that team was, you're talking guys like Mike Bernard, Yorick, Callum Jones, Jeff Jones, Stefan Gill, Tintin Watts. You know, some of the great British basketball players of the last 20 years were playing. But, you know, then they had a successful run of it, moderately. But it got to the point where, as the Americans players were starting to come back into the league, their arm was kind of forced to have to go down that route as well. But I mean, there's another guy that we forgot to mention before. Leicester have got the kind of British golden guy right now playing for them in Jamal. Jamal, for me, is just the sort of player that you'd look at brands and go, you know, you could really use this guy and market this guy because he's that total package, and he's very, very talented. He's a great guy, such a nice guy who would probably love to do that kind of thing. So, you know, work something out, work with these players and build them, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think that just about wraps it up for us. I was going to say, I'll ask a question you can only answer yes or no, but I don't know if I should. Well, I'll do it anyway. We can cut it out if it's crap. Fellas, we'll go Adam first. Yes or no? Is the BBL going in the right direction?
Yes, no.
Josh?
Yes, because, and the reason I say this, I think it was more the apocalypse back in 2001-2 when the NTL deal ran out and money was gone and a lot of teams were gone. And I think it's kind of like there was the membership crisis in the late 2000s up to 2012. And from 2012 to 16, it was rough times because we were seeing so many blowouts. But if you look at it this season and you look at the work that some of the top clubs are doing, I think it's getting better. But it's going to need everybody to try and follow. Like, I mean, I call them the Big Four, not because they dominate the British Basketball League, but I call them the Big Four because they've all been around since the Golden Age, and they're all doing great stuff as sort of clubs and businesses. And I think if everybody follows their model, it can only get better. And I'm talking about the Newcastle Eagles, the Riders, the Sharks, and the London Lions. Worcester's doing well. So, yeah, I think it's gone in the right direction. It's, for me right now, if they all keep operating the way they are, it's a matter of time for something's picked up, whether that's a big TV deal, whether that's sort of new investment. So I'm going to go with yes.
I think we'll all agree. It's every year on year, it's getting better and better. Standards getting better. The venues are. I mean, genuinely, when you watch, the venues are packed. I think we'll all agree it's getting better and better. Right, we'll close things off. Ads, my man, anything to plug before you go?
Yeah, just my yes was basically everything Josh just said there. Yeah. Seriously, there's a lot of positive things happening right now. And like Josh says, if all the other clubs can learn from the ones that are doing it well, and then there is some investment coming in like it's happened down in Plymouth, then we could be on the verge of something. And I really, really hope that we are.
Absolutely. Josh, my man, any videos coming out?
Yeah, soon. I'm just... I've got to stop taking naps during the day. That's what. Yeah, pretty soon. The Sheffield Sharks one's coming pretty soon.
Thanks very much for watching, and we'll be back soon.
Cheers, fellas.